Arif stood near the back of the grand hall, holding his mother's hand tightly as she told him to stay close. Because the place was filled with rich people, glittering lights, and long tables covered with shiny plates. His mother worked here as a cleaner, and today the charity event was bigger than anything Arif had ever seen. Music played softly in the background, and everyone wore new clothes that sparkled under the lights. Arif looked around with wide eyes, amazed by the decorations, the smell of fresh flowers, and the tall chandeliers. Everything felt magical, and for a moment he forgot that he did not belong here. He just felt curious, like every corner of this place was a new world waiting to be explored. While his mother went to clean the far side of the hall, Arif walked slowly, trying not to touch anything. He admired the paintings on the walls, the golden frames, and the people laughing in groups. He heard someone playing soft music and turned toward the sound. In the middle of the hall stood a beautiful black piano, polished until it shined like a mirror. Arif felt drawn to it as if something inside him was calling him closer. He had seen toy pianos in cheap markets, but nothing like this. This piano felt alive, like it was breathing music into the air. He looked around once more. Everyone seemed busy talking, eating, and laughing. Nobody looked at him. So Arif walked closer and placed his small hand on the edge of the piano. Slowly, very softly, he pressed one key. A clear note rang out, gentle yet strong. The sound surprised him. It felt like touching something warm and magical. Arif pressed another key, listening again to the beautiful sound. It made him smile without even thinking. But his smile vanished instantly. A loud voice echoed across the hall. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Everyone turned as a tall, rich man in a suit walked toward Arif. His face was full of anger. People around him stopped talking and stared. Arif froze, his hand still above the piano key. The man shouted again, "You dirty little beggar. Don't you dare touch something that costs more than your entire life." Laughter burst from several guests. Few children pointed at him and giggled. Some adults whispered loudly, "Look at him. Where did he come from?" A woman covered her nose like Arif's presence was dirty. Another man asked if someone had let a street kid wander inside by mistake. Their voices cut into Arif like knives, each word hurting more than the last. Arif felt heat rising in his eyes. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to run, but his feet refused to move. His mother heard the commotion and rushed toward him, fear on her face. She grabbed his shoulders and said, "I told you not to go anywhere. Why did you touch it?" Her voice trembled, not of anger, but of fear of losing her job. Fear of being humiliated in front of all these rich people. The rich man stepped closer, his eyes sharp with insult. "People like you shouldn't even enter halls like this," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "This is not a playground for poor children. Go back to where you belong." His words felt heavy, like stones thrown at Arif's heart. The hall echoed with more laughter, and Arif lowered his head so no one could see his tears. His mother kept apologizing to the guests, bowing again and again, begging them to forgive her son. No one listened. No one cared. They only cared about mocking the little boy who dared to touch something they believed he did not deserve. Arif felt very small, smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He looked at the piano again, wishing he had never touched it. But something deep inside him also whispered that the sound he heard when he touched the key was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. Even in the middle of humiliation, that small moment still felt special. The room continued to buzz with cruel laughter. Cameras pointed at him, phones recording as if he was entertainment. But Arif stood silently, trying hard not to cry. He felt like the whole world hated him. Little did they know that the same hands they insulted would shock them all in just a few moments. The hall slowly returned to its normal noise. But something in the air felt different. Even though people continued talking and laughing, several guests kept glancing at Arif as if expecting him to make another mistake. Arif stood close to his mother now, afraid to move even a single step. His mother's hands were shaking as she wiped tears from his cheeks. She whispered, "Just stay with me, Arif. Please don't wander again." Her voice was soft but filled with worry. She knew how cruel people could be toward those who came from nothing. Arif nodded, but his eyes drifted back to the piano. Something inside him refused to look away. He didn't know why he felt so connected to it. It was like a hidden piece of his heart was inside that instrument. Even now, after being insulted and mocked, he wanted to touch it again, not because he wanted to cause trouble, but because the sound had awakened something deep inside him that he did not understand. Far across the hall, an elderly man with gray hair and a walking stick had watched everything quietly. He was not laughing, he was not recording. He was studying the boy's hands. His name was Professor Karim, a retired music teacher known for training some of the greatest pianists in the city. He had sharp eyes, the kind that could see more than what people showed on the surface. And right now, his eyes were fixed on a riff. Professor Karim slowly approached the rich man who had shouted earlier. "Why did you embarrass the child like that?" he asked calmly. The rich man gave a short laugh. "He touched my piano," he replied proudly. A poor boy like him has no idea how to handle such an expensive instrument, but the professor only raised an eyebrow. "Did you not hear that first note he played?" The rich man scoffed. "It was just noise. Anyone can press a key." The professor shook his head gently. That was not noise. That was intention. His fingers touched that key with control, not accident. There is something special in that boy, and you humiliated him for no reason. The rich man frowned, confused and slightly embarrassed. "Are you saying he knows music?" he asked. The professor looked toward Arif again. "I am saying he feels music," he replied. "And that is something money cannot buy." Back near the cleaning area, Arif tried to wipe the last tears from his eyes. He felt ashamed of himself, ashamed for making his mother worry, and ashamed for being laughed at. His mother kept apologizing to him softly, though she didn't need to. She knew he was just a child, curious and innocent. But society never protected children like him. They only punished them for being poor. Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. "Young boy," the professor said as he approached gently. Arif lifted his head, confused. The professor gave a small, kind smile. "What is your name?" Arif hesitated, then answered quietly, "Arif." The professor nodded. "Arif, do you know what a piano is?" Arif shook his head. "No, sir. I just liked the sound." The professor's eyes softened. Liked or loved? Arif didn't know how to answer, but his eyes showed the truth. The professor saw it clearly and turned to the rich man, who had walked over to see what was happening. "Let the boy touch the piano again," he said. Gasps filled the room. The rich man almost choked on his own breath. "What? Absolutely not. He'll spoil the keys." A few guests laughed again, expecting another scene. But the professor leaned closer and spoke firmly. "If you trust your piano more than your judgment, let us test something. Let the boy touch it. One note only." People began gathering around again, forming a circle like they were watching a strange performance. Arif felt small again as dozens of eyes stared at him. He looked at his mother, needing permission. She looked terrified, but she also trusted the professor's gentle tone more than the cruel voices from earlier. She nodded slowly. The rich man crossed his arms, annoyed but curious. "Fine. Let the little beggar press one key. After that, he leaves." The professor extended his hand toward a riff. "Go on, child. Do not be afraid." Arif walked toward the piano again, his heart beating fast. The laughter from earlier echoed in his memory, but so did that beautiful sound from the first key he touched. He reached the piano and placed his trembling fingers above the keys. The hall went silent, completely silent, waiting to see a mistake. But the professor saw something else. He saw the calm focus in RF's eyes, something only true musicians carried. RF pressed one key. The sound was clean, perfect, not the random hit of an untrained child, but the touch of someone who felt music deeply. The silence in the hall deepened. Something had changed, something big, and this was only the beginning. RF lifted his finger slowly from the piano key, and the soft ringing sound faded into the air. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the hall itself was holding its breath. The rich man who had humiliated him earlier stood stiff, unsure whether to be angry or curious. Some of the guests exchanged confused looks. Children who had been laughing before now stared silently, their smiles fading. To them, it no longer seemed like a joke. The professor stepped closer and looked at RF's fingers with great interest. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked softly. Reef shook his head shyly. The professor smiled. "You pressed the key with the exact weight that a trained pianist would. That is not common, my boy." His words echoed through the hall, and people began whispering. A few guests raised their eyebrows, thinking maybe they had misjudged the boy. The rich man forced a laugh, trying to keep control of the situation. "Come now," he said loudly. "It's still just a press of a key. Anyone can do that." But even he sounded unsure. His voice lacked the confidence he had earlier when he insulted the boy. Something inside him knew that what the professor said was not a simple compliment. It was an observation backed by years of experience. The professor turned to the crowd. "Let me explain," he said calmly. "When a child randomly presses a key, the sound is sharp or too soft. But this boy? He pressed it with intention. That means he has something rare natural feeling for sound." A few guests nodded, impressed. Others shrugged, thinking the professor might be overreacting. But even the ones who doubted felt something shift. A seed of curiosity had been planted. The professor then looked at the rich man. "Let him try another note. Just one more." The rich man hesitated. He didn't want to look foolish in front of wealthy friends. But he also didn't want to argue with a respected figure like Professor Karim. "All right," he said finally. "One more. Only one." RF glanced at his mother again. Her face was pale with worry, but she gave a small nod. She trusted the professor and hoped he truly saw something in her son. RF turned back to the piano. His fingers trembled, but this time he didn't feel fear. He felt something warm rising inside him. He pressed another key, and a new note filled the hall. This one was softer, gentler, like a whisper. A ripple went through the crowd. "Did you hear that?" Someone murmured. "That didn't sound random," another whispered. The professor nodded proudly. "Exactly. He is not guessing. He is choosing." The rich man rolled his eyes, but his lips pressed into a thin line. He could not deny what he heard. Even the parents of the rich children began leaning forward, interested. The laughter and mockery from earlier had disappeared completely. Now there was only silence and curiosity. The professor crouched down so he was eye level with RF. "Do you want to try playing a few more keys?" he asked gently. RF looked at him in shock. Can I?" he whispered. The professor nodded warmly. "Yes, you may. Let your fingers do what your heart feels." RF took a deep breath. He had no idea how to play the piano. He had never touched one in his life except for these few moments. But something inside him guided his fingers. He pressed a third key, then a fourth. Suddenly, a soft pattern formed, not a full melody, but enough to make every person in the hall freeze. Children who were bored before now stared with wide eyes. Adults who had dismissed him now leaned forward as if watching something impossible unfold. Arif didn't know it, but he was creating a simple scale with perfect intervals. His ear understood things, his mind didn. Single quotes T. One woman whispered, "I think." "He might be talented." Another replied, "Talented." "He might be gifted." The rich man's face turned red again, but this time not with anger. This time with embarrassment. He had shouted at the boy, insulted him in front of everyone. And now the boy was proving him wrong. The professor stood and addressed the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have taught piano for over 40 years. I know talent when I see it. This child has natural instincts, something I cannot even teach." A murmur spread through the audience. For the first time since the event began, all eyes were on Arif, not with mockery, but with wonder. But the professor wasn't finished. He turned to the rich man and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, instead of insulting him, "You should be proud that your piano was touched by a future star." The hall erupted with gasps. Some guests clapped. Others laughed in surprise, and Arif. He looked at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. The same hands people mocked moments ago now held the attention of the entire hall. He had no idea what was coming next. But his life was about to change forever. The air inside the hall felt different now, as if the walls themselves were listening. The guests who had mocked Arif only minutes ago now stood silently, waiting to see what the small boy would do next. Arif looked around nervously. He still felt out of place among the shiny clothes, polished shoes, and expensive perfumes. But something else was growing inside him, a strange warmth, a feeling he had never felt before. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't pride. It was something simpler, the feeling of belonging near the piano. Professor Karim stepped back a little and gestured for Arif to place both hands on the keys. Arif hesitated. "Sir, I don't know how to play," he whispered. The professor smiled kindly. "Sometimes we don't need to know. Sometimes we just need to listen to our heart." Arif did not fully understand, but the gentle tone made him trust the professor completely. Slowly, Arif placed both hands on the keys. The crowd leaned in closer. Even the waiters stopped working, frozen by curiosity. The rich man folded his arms tightly, pretending not to care, but his eyes never left the boy's hands. Children who had earlier laughed at him now stood shoulder to shoulder. Unable to look away, Arif pressed the first key with his left hand. A soft, deep note filled the hall. He pressed another with his right hand. This time, the note was higher. Something clicked inside his mind. He pressed two keys together. The sound blended, creating a tiny harmony. His eyes widened. It felt like he had discovered a secret language spoken only by the piano. He pressed more keys slowly at first, then faster. The pattern wasn't perfect. It wasn't something from a famous song, but it was real. It was raw. It was full of emotion. A melody began forming, thin and fragile like a thread, but beautiful. Arif didn't know how he was doing it. He only knew that the piano felt like it was talking back to him, guiding his hands, telling him which key to choose next. People in the hall stopped breathing for a moment. "What? What is this?" A woman whispered. "He's creating it himself." Another replied softly. "That is impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was Arif. The poor boy with torn sandals and a cleaner for a mother was weaving music from nothing. He wasn't reading notes. He wasn't remembering a song. He was creating one. And the melody carried something the rich people in the room hadn't heard in a long time: honesty. Pure, honest emotion. His mother stood at the edge of the circle, her hands covering her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them. She was too afraid to move, afraid that if she blinked, this moment would disappear. All her life, she had tried to protect Arif from the world, never realizing he carried something powerful inside him. The rich man who had insulted him earlier slowly lowered his arms. Embarrassment washed over his face. He whispered to the man beside him, I didn't know," but the other man didn't reply. He was too busy listening to the boy's music. Professor Karim watched with eyes full of wonder. He had seen many students, rich prodigies, skilled teenagers, trained musicians, but none of them had ever touched a piano like this. Arif played with something no school could teach: unfiltered emotion. Every note he pressed carried a lifetime of silent struggles, poverty, loneliness, dreams he never knew he had. The professor pulled out a small notebook and wrote something quickly, but no one noticed. They were all focused on the tiny hands dancing over the keys. Arif's fingers moved faster now, more confident, more free. The melody rose like a bird taking flight, soaring above the heads of the people who once mocked him. Then, suddenly, Arif stopped. He didn't stop because he made a mistake. He stopped because something inside him whispered that the moment was complete. The hall fell silent again. Not the silence of boredom, not the silence of waiting. This silence was different. It was the silence of awe, deep, heavy, almost sacred. Arif slowly pulled his hands back from the piano. His fingers trembled, and he looked around nervously, afraid he had done something wrong. But then, a single sound broke the silence. Clapped. A man near the back of the hall started clapping softly. Others joined. Soon, the entire hall was filled with applause, loud, thunderous applause. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking him. They were celebrating him. Arif looked shocked. He had never heard applause directed at him. He didn't know how to react. His mother cried openly now, her whole body shaking with emotion. The professor stepped forward, placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, and whispered, "You have a gift, Arif, a gift that can change your life." The rich man swallowed hard, his face pale. For the first time in his life, he realized he had judged someone not by their ability, but by their poverty, and he was wrong. Terribly, painfully wrong. The applause continued to echo across the hall, growing louder every second. But for Arif, every sound felt distant. His heart pounded so hard he could barely hear anything. He stepped back from the piano slowly, unsure if he should smile, cry, or run away. His whole body trembled. He wasn't used to people looking at him with respect. For years, all he had seen were harsh eyes, judgment, and pity. But now, hundreds of eyes watched him with something new, admiration. His mother pushed through the small crowd and rushed to him. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, holding him as if she feared the moment might disappear. She whispered, "You did nothing wrong, Arif. Nothing at all." Her voice shook, full of pride she couldn't hide anymore. Tears streamed down her cheeks, falling on his hair. For the first time in his life, Arif felt like he had made his mother proud in front of the world. Meanwhile, the guests continued clapping, but a strange tension filled the room. People kept glancing at the rich man who had insulted Arif earlier. His earlier confidence had melted completely. His face was red, and his jaw was tight. He looked as if the applause was striking him like a slap. He took a step back, then another, wishing he could disappear. The crowd had not forgotten his cruel words. And now, everything he said looked foolish. The professor raised his hands gently, signaling the crowd to quiet down. Slowly, the applause faded. He turned toward Arif, his eyes shining with warmth and disbelief. "Arif," he said softly, "how did you do that?" Arif looked confused. I don't know," he whispered. "The piano. It felt like it was telling me what to play." The professor stared at him for a long moment. "That," he said slowly, "is called a gift. A rare gift." He turned to the crowd. Some people learn music. Others feel it. This boy, he feels it. The room murmured with awe. One guest said, "He's incredible." Another added, "Imagine what he could do with real training." A woman in a red dress wiped tears from her eyes. "This child has more talent than half the people who come to these events," she whispered. A young girl around Arif's age stepped closer. Earlier, she had laughed at him with her friends, but now her eyes were wide with guilt. I'm sorry for laughing," she said quietly. Arif nodded shyly, not knowing what to say. He never expected an apology from someone so rich. At that moment, the rich man finally stepped forward. His pride had shattered. His voice, once loud and arrogant, was now small and shaky. I might have been harsh," he muttered. "I didn't know he could play like that." His apology was weak, more like an excuse. The professor turned toward him sharply. "You judged him before he even touched the piano," he said calmly. "Not because of who he is, but because of what he wears." The hall fell silent. The professor's words cut deep, not just for the rich man, but for everyone who had quietly laughed or whispered earlier. But the professor did not scold further. Instead, he looked at Arif again with a soft smile. "My boy," he said, "would you like to play something for us? Something from your heart." Arif's eyes widened. He shook his head nervously. I don't know any songs," the professor chuckled. "You don't need to know any. Just do what you did. Trust your feelings." The rich man stepped forward again, biting his lip. "My piano," he began, but his voice trailed off when the professor glanced at him. He took a deep breath. "He can play it," he said finally, the words tasting bitter. "Let him play." The professor turned to Arif. "Go ahead." Arif looked at his mother. She gave him a small nod, her eyes full of hope. He walked toward the piano once more. His steps were slow, careful, but not as fearful as before. People moved aside, creating a clear path for him. The hall felt quiet again, waiting. Arif sat on the piano stool. He placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, he simply breathed. Then, he began. The melody that came out was unlike anything heard earlier. It started soft, like a child whispering a secret. Then it grew stronger, like a voice healing from years of silence. Each note carried feelings Arif didn't have words for: loneliness, dreams, pain, and hope. The music rose and fell like waves, filling the hall with emotions so strong that some guests wiped tears without even realizing it. Arif wasn't playing a song. He was telling his story, and the piano understood every word. Arif continued to play, unaware of how deeply the music was affecting everyone in the hall. His small fingers danced over the keys as if they had been trained for years. Even though this was the first real piano he had ever touched, the melody rose gently, then dipped into softer notes, like a tiny heartbeat learning how to speak. Every sound carried something real, something that made people feel as if they were hearing pain and hope wrapped inside the same breath. Guests who earlier whispered cruel comments now stood frozen, unable to look away. One man, known for his strict and cold personality, blinked quickly as if fighting tears. A woman pressed her hand against her chest, whispering to her friend, "Where has this boy been hiding all his life?" Even the children who had laughed at him without thinking now watched with wide, quiet eyes, stunned by the talent that came from someone they once mocked. Arif's mother stood at the edge of the circle, completely still. Her trembling hands were pressed together as if she was praying, though she didn't even realize it. Tears streamed down her cheeks non-stop, but she didn't bother to wipe them. All she could think was, "My son. My son is shining." She had spent years cleaning homes, halls, and offices. She had worked in silence, overlooked by everyone. But today, Her son stood in a place where everyone saw him not as a poor boy, not as a cleaner's child, but as someone extraordinary. Professor Karim watched the boy with deep admiration, his heart swelling with pride. He had taught talented students before gifted children from wealthy families who had the best instruments and training. But none of them had ever played the way Arif did. What Arif had was pure. It was raw. It was emotional truth turned into sound. The professor whispered to himself, he doesn't need to learn music. He is music. Then something changed. Arif's melody slowed. His hands hesitated. The professor leaned forward, sensing a shift. Arif wasn't making a mistake, he was remembering something. A memory rising from deep inside him, shaping the notes that followed. The next part of his melody was darker, heavier. It carried sadness, loneliness that came from sleeping on cold floors, hunger that came from days without enough food, and shame from being treated as less than others. The hall felt it. Everyone did. The sound pierced through their hearts, leaving them nearly breathless. A man near the back whispered, "This child has lived through things no child should." A woman nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. His music? It's telling us everything. Arif continued, letting the heaviness sink like a stone into the room. But then something beautiful happened. The melody shifted again, light, replacing the darkness, hope rising like the sun after a storm. His music became gentle, comforting, like a small hand reaching out to someone crying alone. It was as if Arif's heart was speaking directly to them. I have suffered. Yes, but I am still here, and I still dream. By the time Arif touched the final key, the entire hall was silent, so silent that even the air felt frozen. Then, the applause came. This time, it wasn't loud and chaotic. It was soft, emotional, almost respectful. Like people were afraid to break the magic that had filled the room. Some people clapped with shaking hands. Others covered their faces with their palms, unable to control their tears. A few children hugged their parents quietly. Everyone felt changed. Humbled Professor Karim stepped forward, his voice warm but strong. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what you heard just now was not practice. It was not training. It was the voice of a child who carries music in his soul." He placed a gentle hand on Arif's shoulder. "This boy is a prodigy, a rare gift, a blessing." Arif looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. "Prodigy," he whispered. The professor smiled. "Yes, Arif. Someone born with a gift that even time cannot create." The rich man who had insulted Arif earlier swallowed hard, unable to hide his shame. He stepped forward slowly, each step heavy. When he reached Arif, he stopped, looking down at the boy, then at the piano, then at the guests who stared at him with judgment. He cleared his throat. I owe you an apology." His voice shook. "I was wrong. Terribly wrong." Arif stared at him quietly, unsure how to respond. "I thought your touch would spoil my piano," the man continued, "but instead, you reminded all of us what real music feels like." The hall murmured in agreement. Arif didn't hate the man. He had never hated anyone. He simply nodded, and that small gesture hit the rich man harder than any insult could have. Then the professor spoke again, louder this time. "This child must not be ignored. He deserves training, support, and a chance to grow." People nodded. Some stepped forward, ready to help. Something big was coming, bigger than Arif could imagine, and the hall finally understood. The poor boy they mocked was becoming the star they would never forget. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the hall did not. It lingered like warm sunlight after a long night. People stood quietly, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Arif sat still on the piano stool, feeling as if he had woken from a dream. He looked at his hands, again those same small hands that had always scrubbed floors, carried buckets, and helped his mother. Now those hands had created music strong enough to silence a hall full of wealthy people. Professor Karim stepped in front of Arif and bent slightly to meet his eyes. "Arif," he said softly, "has anyone ever taught you music before?" Arif shook his head. "No, sir. I only heard songs on the streets sometimes." The professor smiled gently. "Then remember this moment. Because it proves that talent does not ask where you were born, what clothes you wear, or how much money you have. It simply exists." People around them nodded in agreement. The professor's words touched something deep inside the crowd. Many of them had lived comfortable lives, never worrying about hunger or fear. But seeing a poor child shine with such brilliance reminded them that greatness could rise from any corner of the world. Arif's mother approached slowly. She still looked overwhelmed, unable to believe what she had seen. "Sir, I don't know what happened," she whispered. "My son has never been near such things." The professor gave her a warm smile. "Your son is extraordinary." And today, the world saw it. A well-dressed woman stepped forward next. She had elegant hair and diamonds that sparkled under the lights, but her eyes were soft with emotion. "I would like to sponsor the boy's music lessons," she said. "He must learn properly," another man added. "I can donate a keyboard so he can practice at home," a third person said. "I will help with school supplies and books." Offers poured in more than Arif or his mother could ever imagine. Arif looked at his mother, confused. "Mama, why are they helping us?" he asked. His mother placed a hand on his cheek. "Because today they saw something in you that I saw every day," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They saw your heart." Meanwhile, the rich man who had insulted Arif earlier stood stiffly at the back of the group. He looked smaller now, almost fragile. He took a deep breath and stepped forward again. His voice trembled as he said, "I want to contribute as well." People glanced at him with cold eyes. He continued anyway. "Not money. Not gifts. I want to give him something more important." He pointed at the piano. "Arif, this piano will always be open to you. You may come here any day, any time, and play." The hall fell silent again. Not because they were shocked, but because they saw genuine remorse in his voice. The professor nodded slowly. "That is a good start," he said. "But remember, this boy does not need your pity. He needs opportunity." The rich man nodded, swallowing his pride. Professor Karim turned back to Arif and placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Arif," he said, "I want to teach you. Personally, I want to take you as my student." Arif's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't have money to pay you," he whispered. The professor smiled warmly. "You will not pay me with money. You will pay me by practicing, by learning, and by believing in yourself." Arif stared at him, unable to speak. He had never had a teacher before. Never had anyone believe in him like this. The professor continued. "I will train you like I have trained the greatest pianists. I will guide you step by step. And one day, Arif, one day, this world will hear your name." Arif's mother started crying again, this time with uncontrollable joy. She hugged her son tightly, whispering prayers of gratitude. The guests around them felt something shift inside their hearts. Many of them had attended countless charity events, but none had ever seen anything this real, this powerful. For the first time, charity didn't feel like giving money. It felt like witnessing a miracle. Arif looked at the professor. "Sir, will I really learn?" he asked softly, almost afraid the dream might disappear. The professor nodded firmly. "Yes, my boy. You will learn. You will grow. And I will be proud to stand beside you." Arif felt his heart swell with emotions he didn't have words for. Hope, excitement, disbelief, everything mixed together like music inside him. He looked around the hall at the people who once mocked him and now stood in awe. And for the first time in his life, Arif understood something powerful. He was not invisible. He was not worthless. He had a future, and that future was waiting for him. Just beyond this moment, the hall slowly emptied as the event came to an end, but the atmosphere had completely changed. People walked out whispering about the poor boy who played the piano like a miracle. Some looked back at Arif before leaving, as if they wanted to remember his face forever. Others wiped their tears quietly, still shocked that a child who came in unnoticed had become the center of the entire night. Arif stood there, holding his mother's hand. He felt shy now that everyone was staring at him. He was not used to attention. He had always walked with his head down, staying small so no one would push him away or laugh at him. But now, people came forward respectfully, not to mock him, but to greet him. "You are amazing," one woman said, patting his shoulder gently. Another man added, "You have a gift, son. Never lose it." Arif didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, feeling overwhelmed. The professor stayed by his side the entire time. He could see that Arif felt nervous with all the attention. So he placed a calm hand on the boy's back and guided him through the crowd. After a while, only a few people remained in the hall: the professor, Arif, his mother, and the rich man who watched them from a distance. His posture stiff with guilt, Arif looked around at the now quiet hall. The chandeliers above glowed softly, reflecting off the black piano that had changed everything. The same piano he was yelled at for touching. The same piano that had unlocked a future he didn't know he had. His mother knelt in front of him, holding his face gently. "Today," she whispered, "you showed the world who you are." Her voice shook. "I always prayed that life would give you a chance. And today, you took it." Arif hugged her tightly, feeling warm tears fall on his shoulder. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew one thing: his life would never be the same again. The professor cleared his throat softly. "I have arranged something," he said. Arif and his mother looked up at him. "Starting next week, Arif will come to my home studio for lessons. I will teach him everything I know." He turned to the mother. "You don't have to pay anything. This is my promise." Arif's mother clasped her hands together. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The professor smiled. "By believing in your son. That is enough." At that moment, the rich man finally stepped forward. His steps were slow and heavy, like someone carrying a weight inside his heart. He stopped in front of Arif and bent down slightly, not to look down on the child, but to meet him at eye level. "Arif," he began, his voice quiet and unsteady, "I am sorry for everything I said. I judged you without knowing you. I treated you like you didn't belong here." He swallowed hard. "But I was wrong. You belong anywhere your music takes you." Arif looked at him with curious, innocent eyes. He wasn't angry. He had never been taught to hate. He simply nodded and said in a soft voice, "It's okay." The rich man closed his eyes briefly, touched by the boy's simplicity. "If you ever need this piano again," he said, placing a hand on the piano gently, "it will always be here for you." The professor nodded. "Good," he said, "because he will need it often." A week later, Arif walked into the professor's home studio, a small, beautiful room filled with instruments. There were shelves full of music books, framed certificates, and photographs of famous musicians the professor had trained. But the thing that caught Arif's attention was the piano in the center of the room. It wasn't as grand as the one in the hall, but it had a warm, welcoming glow. The professor guided him gently. "Sit," he said. "Today, we begin." That first lesson was slow, simple, but magical. Arif learned how to sit properly, how to position his fingers, how to breathe before playing a note. The professor watched him closely. Even with basic instructions, Arif absorbed information like a sponge. Every time he touched the keys, the professor felt goosebumps. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Arif practiced every day after his mother's work shift. Sometimes they walked home late, exhausted but happy. The professor taught him scales, chords, pieces from different composers. But he always encouraged Arif to make his own music, to let his heart speak. And slowly, Arif grew. 1 year later, in a brightly lit auditorium, a young boy in simple clothes walked out onto a stage holding thousands of people. Cameras flashed. The audience waited silently. Arif sat at the piano, closed his eyes, and began to play. The same hall that once laughed at him. The same world that once ignored him. Now listened to him with awe, and in that moment, Arif realized something powerful. The world had never been out of reach. It had only been waiting for him to touch the keys,